So I'm honored to welcome Jonathan today, Jonathan Metzger. We are really flattered that you are here, Jonathan. Let me give you a little introduction. You all know Jonathan, but in case you are not following his work, Jonathan is a professor of urban and regional studies at the Royal Technological Institute at Stockholm. And I always know you as a planner, but in our recent conversations, I learned that you studied economic history in your in your PhD at Stockholm University, and your master's degree was in School of History, Department of Sociology. So bringing that together, you are a planner with all this interesting interdisciplinary background. Jonathan has a broad scientific background, concrete experiences from working as a practitioner on the regional and transnational levels. He also told me that he's a politician in his spare time. I don't know where that spare time is, but he managed to be a politician at the municipality of Stockholm. He published internationally, of course, we know your publications. I'm a big fan. But for those who are not in the field, Jonathan has lots of publications on mainly planning theory, sustainable urban development, methodologies, and ethnographic studies. And what I also like your work as a planner is your attention on the planning, the agency of planning, the planners. And recently you are doing this interesting research project where I'm also a advisor, and I truly enjoy the perspective of planners, which is very important to know. Your research mainly deal with decision making concerning complex environmental issues, but it's not excluding all kinds of other fields of urban and regional development. Your theoretical frameworks are always very messy. Well, I wouldn't say messy, it's sophisticated. Planning studies, human geography, science and technology studies, and organizational studies. That's why Jonathan is always very rich to listen when I'm in ESOP at planning theory sessions. It's a pleasure to listen to you. And now I'm double excited that you are here with us. Welcome. And floor is yours to talk about.
Thank you. You're too kind. You're too kind, Tuna. I'm really honored to be here. I want to start, of course, by thanking you, Tuna, for the invitation. I'm so happy to be here today with you, and also Emma and Alicia sitting somewhere for organizing 2 wonderful days with the UGoveRN group. It's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed it, and it's a real honor. What I will be presenting is very much work in progress. I was trying to sell something that I was comfortable with to you, Tuna. Say, I've done these presentations before, they work. You said, no, do something new. So I'm doing something new, hopefully not too half-baked. It's the very first presentation of from a research project called Who Develops the City of the Future? I've been conducting for 4 years together with my colleagues Maria Håkansson and Jenny Lindblad. And as you mentioned, Tuna, we've had the privilege to have you contribute on our International Advisory Board. So it feels good to be able to be doing this first presentation here in your presence. And I want to start by taking you straight into the research process. We're sitting in a meeting room at KTH and have just had a 3-hour-long workshop together with employees from a property development company. I'm just going to start my timer so I don't get totally lost. I might anyway, but... So we're sitting there with these employees from a property development company. Towards the end of the workshop, we start discussing about how they feel about changes to how urban development in Sweden works in comparison to previous years. And one of our respondents, we can call her Anna, remarks that when she started working in housing development in 2006, there wasn't a requirement for conducting as many expert investigations as part of the planning and development process as there are today. And to exemplify, Anna mentioned surface runoff investigations, which are now an ever-present obligatory and previously wasn't. And she also mentions energy balance calculations as another example of more commonly occurring investigations in comparison to previous times. One of Anna's colleagues, Peter, chips in and says that overall, the process has been greatly expanded in recent years and attention to many new aspects have been introduced. And this observation also rhymes with the overall picture provided by a total of 9 workshops that we conducted in this project. For instance, Sarah, who works in a municipality, states that there is a constantly increasing demand for issues to pay attention to. Quote, "It feels as if there is just more and more of everything." One of Sarah's colleagues, Amanda, later adds that sometimes municipal urban planning can feel a little bit like trawling. Quote, "It's like a fishing troll. We just collect up new issues that constantly makes it slower and slower to get to the end of the process." Ludwig, who works in a property development company, comments that the effects of all these new issues that are being paid attention to in the urban planning process is that practitioners are, quote, "drowning in information. There's so much that's supposed to be investigated, so much information that is produced, they can't really sort through and differentiate what is important and not." One way to understand the above comments is that they all in different ways relate to questions concerning attention and attention allocation. Attention is currently at the center of many societal debates, much owing to the emerging insight that the social media economy is an attention economy. When entertainment is free, what you pay with is your attention. That is your focused mental engagement on a particular item of information, as noted by economists Davenport and Beck in their 2001 book, The Attention Economy. Attention economics builds upon the insight that attention is a scarce resource and therefore has a value. Being scarce means that there is only so much of it, and therefore that it therefore has to be allocated wisely, and that we must be careful in how we prioritize our investments of attention. And to return to the quotes from the urban practitioners in the opening, if we look at contemporary planning practice in Sweden, there is currently a widespread sense that there is not enough attention to go around to successfully take care of all the complex issues that are screaming for attention in urban development practice. Ecosystem services, biking infrastructure, efficient waste management, child-friendly public environment, loneliness-reducing public environments, heat island effects, flooding risks, business-friendly streetscapes, fiber optic wiring, and so on, and so on, and so on. All of these issues and 100 others seemingly need to be tackled within every single urban development project if we are to be truly satisfied with having dealt with all the issues that in themselves and together affect whether an environment becomes as good as it could have been. Working in contemporary urban development is therefore laboring under a regime of sensed scarcity in Sweden. There's always more that could have been done and maybe should have been done if only more time and resources would have been available. Taking this observation as my starting point, the more precise focus of my talk today is an upshot of this observation. Namely, if attention is endemically scarce in planning processes, a relevant question to ask is which issues recurrently turn up at the top of the queue and regularly get attended to in planning processes and which do not. This could perhaps be called the political economy of attention in planning practice. It could also be formulated as attending to the uneven practical geography of attention in planning processes. If attention is scarce and there is a sense that there is always too little to go around, what decide on how it gets allocated? What is it invested in? And within this scarcity economy, what issues are not able to compete for attention? The contemporary state of this uneven practical geography of attention in planning processes is what I sometimes jokingly refer to as the current attention deficit order of planning, seeing that I argue that it's not necessarily a disorder, but that there are patterns in how the scarce resources of attention are invested, which are largely, but not totally, conditioned by institutional constraints. And in this talk, I'll give you some touchdowns in the results of the workshops we have done with planning practitioners in Sweden within the context of the Who Develops the City of the Future project, which have partially aimed at charting these practical geographies of attention in this particular time and place. First, in the next step of my talk, I'll briefly review some influential social scientific theories regarding allocation of attention, which have been formulated primarily within the disciplinary context of organization theory. After that, I'll say something about how planning theory has previously addressed questions regarding attention, and then I'll move on to give you some tentative results from our study in Sweden before wrapping up with some reflections over those results and maybe some discussions of future research we can have. Okay. What was the emergence with the so-called Carnegie School of Organization Theory, spearheaded by scholars such as Herbert Simon and James March, that attention came to be placed at the center of organizational theorizing. As expressed in a review of research on the topic of attention in organization theory, it stated that what characterizes organizational views of attention is a dual emphasis on cognition, that is limited attention capacity, and structure, how organizations shape individuals' attention. Just like cognitive limitations of individuals help explain how organizations are structured, organizations in turn help understand how individual attention is distributed and coordinated in collective systems. Here I will focus on two crucial theoretical innovations regarding how we understand attention that had their roots within this vein of organization theory. One, the idea of attention as a scarce resource, and two, the garbage can model of decision making. In a famous paper, no, we're not there yet. In a famous paper from 1971 discussing the advent of the information society, Herbert Simon claimed that, quote, in an information-rich world, most of the cost of information is the cost incurred by the recipient. It's not enough to know how much it costs to produce and transmit information. We must also know how much it costs in terms of scarce attention to receive it. Already in his seminal book, Administrative Behavior from 1947, Simon stated that it is a natural implication of the notion of limited attention that individuals cannot simultaneously attend to all dimensions of a decision, and thus attention to different features can only be allocated sequentially. So put more simply, the timing of attention is crucial to how decisions come to be made. The effects of the timing of attention was also central to the equally famous and infamous garbage can model of decision making, developed by Cohen, March, and Olsen in the early 1970s, which aimed at modeling decision-making processes under less than ideal conditions, and in contexts which are characterized by what they called organized anarchy. Their argument is that under the decision-making conditions we find in many politically and collegially managed organizations, such as universities, for instance, the allocation of attention is generally unstable, bordering on the whimsical, due to the nature of the institutional arrangements. Particularly potent in this regard is the arbitrary connection in time between the articulation of problems, the proposal of suggestions, the proposal of solutions, and the presence of decision makers and their attention, as well as decision-making situations. They are not neatly ordered. Sometimes there are solutions looking for problems to solve. There are problems looking to be aired. There are decision makers looking for decisions to make, and there are decision-making situations that need an agenda to be filled for that particular occasion, and so on. Consequently, decision-making under conditions of organized anarchy cannot be expected to be a neat and predictable process, neither in the short nor the long term. In my introduction, I used what I find to be the very evocative expressions of political economy of attention in planning practice, as well as the practical geography of attention in planning processes. Both these expressions are borrowed from communicative planning theorist John Forrester, who's perhaps the planning theorist who has most explicitly addressed questions regarding the dynamics of attention allocation in planning practice. In Critical Theory, Public Policy and Planning Practice from 1993, Forrester writes that planners should make an effort to investigate, quote, in what ways the existing institutional structure patterns the investment of attention and resources. The reason why this is important, according to Forrester, is that these institutional structures distract or focus attention or disorganize or organize attention to issues of significant public concern. So they can either focus attention or lead attention away from specific issues, these structures. Forrester's brand of planning theory is distinctly ethical normative. He's very much focused on how planners can improve their practice from an ethical normative perspective and according to a specific ethos that he professes. He therefore primarily focuses his interest in how planning work can work to direct attention in ways that make planning processes more transparent and inclusive. And I would really recommend, if you're interested in these questions and relating that, to really read his book. He's really very interesting and rich. But in our research, I mean, we took inspiration from these phrases he coined, although he didn't, develop really what he meant about the political autonomy. He didn't develop what he meant with the practical geography more than in a few short sentences. And what we did, we chose to take a somewhat different tack than his very strongly kind of ethical normative and take a more kind of empirical angle, asking how planners themselves apprehend how and why limited resources of attention are allocated in the urban development process. So in our research, we draw somewhat loosely on Forrester's work to ask, is there a discernible political economy of attention in the Swedish urban development process? If so, what does it look like? And is there an identifiable practical geography attention in the Swedish urban development process? And if so, what does that look like? For these results of our discussions to be at least faintly intelligible to you, I'm afraid I'll have to perform a somewhat lengthy detour to explain a little bit about how the institutional framework of Swedish urban development looks. Arguably, the most decisive process within Swedish urban development is the development and adoption of the so-called detailed development plan. The detailed development plan is a legally binding land use plan, and the management of the detailed development planning process is within the ambit of powers of Swedish municipalities. It's so strong, this ownership of this process, that it's referred to as the planning monopoly of municipalities. The degree of detail in the detailed plan is somewhat discretionary. It can range from quite zoning-like regulations to more commonly including detailed instructions regarding the placement and height of buildings and even their physical characteristics. The plan legally establishes so-called building rights, which, if the plan becomes adopted, are guaranteed for a period of implementation, usually 15 years. So once adopted, unless there is a really serious kind of process error, they are cannot be changed for 15 years. So they're there, you can build this. Although municipalities are formally responsible for producing detailed development plans, the work has in practice to a large extent also been outsourced to in-house retainer consultants and externally subcontracted experts. This is a stylized figure of the so-called expanded planning procedure, which must be used in cases where there is a potential for significant environmental impact, disagreement, or controversy, or if planning proposals are not in line with the legally non-binding but loosely guiding comprehensive plan that every municipality must have. A few key moments in the process are important to point out here. Prior to the initiation of the formal planning process, and here in the gray zone, the property developer makes its own analysis of the preconditions and feasibility of a development project. Already at this stage, there are often quite extensive informal dialogues between a developer and a municipality to discern the desirability and probability of project success. Many project ideas are cancelled already at this stage. If the development is on municipally owned land, which is quite common in Sweden, that is to be leased or sold, some municipalities have as their routine to write so-called land allocation agreements with the prospective developer already at this early stage. These agreements roughly outline the preconditions, content of the project, and the mutual rights and obligations between the developer and municipality within the specific project. The initiation of the formal planning process usually occurs through a startup meeting. The discussion in the meeting is recorded in a startup memorandum, which is then approved by the municipality's politically elected building committee or even the municipal council many times. The startup meeting is usually convened by the assigned case officer at the municipal department responsible for urban development. Who participates in this meeting is not legally stipulated. It usually brings together representatives from different departments in the municipal organization, as well as representatives from the developer and possibly process consultants that are involved from the beginning. The purpose of the startup meeting is to explore what are the preconditions of the plan, to clarify the priorities and goals of the municipality and developer, and to chart out what are the key issues that need to be addressed to ensure that the plan becomes legally permissible. In the next stage of the planning process, following the startup meeting, the expert investigations that were identified to be needed to ensure reasonable caution are produced from independent expert consultants. Now we're here, in between these dots, doing the planning work. During this stage, numerous legally non-required dialogues may also be performed between the municipality and possibly also the developer on the one hand, and on the other hand, local residents, interest groups, property owners, representatives from surrounding municipalities, companies, national government agencies, etc. The formal planning process also includes a legally stipulated period of public consultation on an early draft of the plan and on the technical reports that the municipality assesses to be of particular importance. So this is here. The municipality must make these documents available to those actors who are considered to be legally defined stakeholders in relation to the planning site, and also with surrounding municipalities and the county administrative board. And the county administrative board we'll be coming back to. They represent and coordinate the interests of the central government in the planning process. The municipality can also arrange more extensive consultation activities, but this is not a legal requirement. Following the consultation, the municipality may choose to revise the planning proposal, and whether it does so or not, the finalized proposal must then be presented for public review. So that's what they really want to do. That's what they present there. The opinions submitted in this review and the municipality's response to them must be published in a review report. After the review procedure, the municipality can no longer make any major alterations to the proposal. It's locked. When going out on review, it's locked pretty much. If it's deemed that major alterations are necessary on the basis of the review responses, the review process must be repeated in full, and potentially some other stages must be repeated depending on how many changes they have to make. So you have to backtrack then. Once the review process is concluded, the plan is passed on to the municipal planning committee for political approval. When the plan has been approved, it's forwarded to the county administrative board again for a permissibility review. At this stage, the county administrative board has the legal authority to decide on making an overriding review of the plan, following which it may also decide to repeal the plan if it's considered to be lacking in its consideration of national interests or otherwise technically or legally unfit. If the county administrative board does not exercise its right to repeal, individual property owners and other recognized stakeholders affected by the plan may still appeal the plan to the public court system. Only if no such appeals are submitted or the legal appeal process has been completely concluded, then the plan gains legal force and the building permit application process can be initiated on the basis of the plan. This was a lengthy description, but it's also a lengthy process. From the initiation to legal force, the average time for a Swedish detailed development plan, it's 4.5 years, generally longer or even much longer in cases of urban infill development in already urbanized areas. The planning and building law and related legal regulations can come across as providing a clear and firm framework for the urban development process in Sweden. However, this is not the whole story. Even if the law states that the overall requirements and goals for land use and environmental planning, these requirements as they are formulated in the law are on a very general level and quite loosely defined. Consequently, in practice, there are numerous central aspects of the process that are guided by more or less codified or mutable praxis and even local customs and idiosyncrasies. Local political majorities as well as public opinions can play an important role in the planning process, as well as other factors such as professional norms, temporary governmental funding schemes, the organization of urban development work within the municipal organization, and more. Two key actors that deserve to be particularly highlighted in this context because they play important roles in defining local and national praxis in the implementation of the legislation. And these are the, as already mentioned, the county administrative boards and the courts. The county administrative boards are the regional arm of the central state in Sweden and have the responsibility of safeguarding national interests in the urban development process. It also functions as the interface between the different specialized national state agencies and the municipal authorities within the context of the urban development process. Formally, the county administrative board safeguards the upholding of 5 types of interests: national interests, environmental quality standards, intermunicipal interests, issues concerning health and safety, and the risk of accident, flooding, and erosion. The legally codified national interests, which were one part of this, include a broad range of issues such as the securing of a functioning power supply, cultural heritage protection, national security interests, and national transport infrastructure. Further, within this broad ambit of responsibilities, there's room for a degree of discretion that have come to produce different praxi of interpretation regarding the concrete content of these responsibilities in different county administrative boards in different parts of the country. So they put different things into what is contained, for instance, in caring for the safety and the risk of accidents, flooding, and erosion. There are different local or rather regional praxi of how this is exercised. Secondly, but more briefly, the role of the courts has become increasingly important in the Swedish planning system in recent decades through a number of reforms that have aimed at securing that the Swedish planning system conforms with European standards of the rule of law. Consequently, planning decisions have become appealable to 3 consecutive levels of courts, and as a result, the Swedish planning system has become quite litigation heavy, with legal appeals of detailed development plans having become common and more the rule than the exception in densely populated areas. The opinions of the higher levels of the courts also carry a strong power of interpretive precedence. Even if Sweden is not formally a common law system, the opinions of the 2 highest appeal courts establish interpretive legal praxis and thus guide the implementation of the law. So just to say a few words about how our study was empirically designed before jumping to the discussing the results. All in all, we performed 10 workshops within the context of the project with between 3 and 6 external participants, in addition to 2 to 3 workshop facilitators, including me and my colleagues from the research group. One workshop was a pilot workshop. It didn't work out that well, so we tweaked the whole arrangement, and then we did 9 more workshops that worked much better. 3 workshops each with municipalities, technical consultancies, and property developers. Okay, we can talk. If you want to know more, we can talk about it in the questions. So what about the political economy of attention then in this detailed development plan process? As suggested by the work of the Carnegie School, our research results show that the timing of attention is a crucial issue in the urban development process. The importance of timing to when attention is allocated to what in the process also has an overtly economic motivation. Many of our respondents stress that failing to pay proper attention to the crucial issues at the right time will incur high costs counted in both money, professional prestige, and political goodwill. In an urban development economy, which to a large extent builds upon speculation and which is dependent on the speculative investment of money as well as time, project failure and sunk costs are major objects of concern for municipal planners as well as property developers. Consequently, even if the Swedish detailed development process is designed to be a process of public search for issues and solutions, a transparent kind of collaborative, open process of really trying to figure out what is the best way to design this public, or at least this urban space, and a consequent balancing of conflicting interests on the basis of a transparent and democratic process, there are very strong, nonetheless, economic incentives for both municipalities and developers to front-load the process as much as possible. That is, to attempt to ensure that they have amassed as much knowledge about crucial issues as possible in the process as early on as possible, so that tentative solutions can be developed backstage already before the legally mandated open public consultation is initiated. In this regard, the very earliest stages of the process are of crucial importance. The developer needs to discern already before initiating a formal plan request that they have a business case at all. And to do so, they need to ensure at least the potential technical and economic feasibility of the project. Further, they need to develop arguments about the desirability of the proposed development to be used towards the politicians and public servants in the municipalities. The developer needs to discern already before initiating a formal plan request that they have a business case at all. And to do so, they need to ensure at least the potential technical and economic feasibility of the project. Further, they need to develop arguments about the desirability of the proposed development to be used towards the politicians and public servants in the municipality, so as to be able to convince the municipality that the proposed development is feasible and politically desirable. The next crucial moment of attention is right at the initiation of the formal planning process, at the so-called startup meeting. This meeting is described in our workshops as a highly ritualized occasion which comes with its own dramaturgy. The startup meeting is the moment when all specialized areas of expertise and responsibility are expected to raise any issues and concerns they may have regarding the proposed development, and it is following this meeting that it's decided which expert reports need to be commissioned to establish the feasibility of the project. So the startup meeting is to a large extent a forum in which issues are aired and decisions on attention allocation are made. This is where the trolling for issues mentioned by the workshop participant in the beginning of my talk is performed to ensure that all crucial potential technical aspects are investigated and attended to. Why is it so important that all potential issues are given attention already at this stage? Because from here on, there is a negative discount on time. The further on we get in the process, the more costly delays become. Crucial issues, such as the potential presence of endangered animal or plant species that have not been dealt with earlier, and that come up in the consultation phase following the presentation of the first plan draft, will incur costly delays due to the necessity of ordering new expert reports as well as possible alterations to the proposed design. The greatest fear, however, is that serious issues will come up as late as in the review phase of the final plan proposal. If the county administrative board presents serious criticism of the plan at this stage, this presents a serious danger that the plan may indeed be repealed if it's pushed through for approval. However, at this late stage, major revisions to the plan cannot be performed anymore without at least a partial restart of the formal planning process, which implies another few months or even years before the plan is approved and construction can commence. On the slide you can see here, it's small text now, you can see examples of some of those issues. I'm moving on now to the practical geography of attention. That was the economy. You can see some of those issues mentioned by our workshop participants as most prominently receiving attention in the detailed development plan process. I'll speak about some of them. Primarily, the issues that receive significant attention can be classified in 4 categories corresponding to the following questions. Is the proposed development technically possible? Is the proposed development economically feasible? Is the proposed development legally permissible? And is the proposed development politically desirable? It's here important to point out that these categories are not mutually exclusive. Rather, they overlap or correlate quite strongly. For instance, with regards to economic and political feasibility, they overlap to a high degree, as well as technical and economic feasibility. And I'll say something more about that. So to start from the top, it may seem reasonable that a key question regarding any urban development project, of course, is, can this be done at all? Is it even possible to build here? Technical issues by necessity carry a great weight in the planning process. As one of our workshop participants jokingly put it, few people probably realize that it's the guys who drive the garbage trucks that actually decide what our cities look like. For instance, due to the requirements regarding turning radiuses and safe handling conditions for the trucks and the vessels. Sometimes technical issues are extremely decisive in determining the feasibility of a proposed project. For instance, if the grid provider bluntly states that it will not be able to connect any new buildings to the grid in the foreseeable future due to a shortage of power supply, which is actually the case in some parts of Sweden today due to lags in grid capacity development. However, it's also important to unpack what possible actually implies in this context. This is not technically possible. It's often not a statement about basic physics, but rather about economic, legal, and political feasibility. An example that can be mentioned here is an episode recounted by some planning consultants in one of our workshops when a proposed design was ruled out by the electricity engineers due to the existence of a major supply cable in the planned development area, which was deemed impossible to move. However, when the planning consultants probed deeper, impossible to move in practice meant a cost of around 100,000 euros. The consultants illustrated in the workshop, when we were there with them, how they looked at each other with big eyes and said, okay, well, that's no problem. Then they laughed in the workshop and said, obviously the engineer had no clue what kind of money the land sale that would be made possible by this moving this cable would generate, which was in the 100-folds of the cost of doing so. And this brings us to the second category of issues that receive strong attention, those that relate to economic feasibility. The basic conditions for any urban development in Sweden today is that there is a viable business case for the property developer as well as for the municipality. What is a good business case is clear for the property developer. Is there a bottom line? Can they make a profit? This is a question that the property developer pays crucial attention to throughout the process, and as soon as the answer begins to lean towards a no, the future of the project lies in serious doubt. Some of the specific issues that questions of economic feasibility bring into the focus of attention regard struggles over the extent and design of public space, the amount of store frontage at ground level in residential buildings, which is often seen as desirable by the municipality but less so by the developer, and also, which was interesting to hear recurrently when speaking with the property developers, the construction of balconies, which is a priority of the developers because it increases the value of the apartment disproportionately in relation to the construction cost. What is a good business case for the municipality if we move on from the developer? It shouldn't be as obvious. Considering the municipality's legally established responsibility to provide good quality urban environments and high quality housing for all segments of the population, one would expect that these goals would be seen as important areas of investment. However, this is not always the case. As repeatedly concluded by recent research on urban development in Sweden, due to a confluence of factors such as ideological convictions, municipal structural financial deficits, and central government politics of induced municipal austerity, a crass focus on generating financial value has recently come to strongly influence or even dominate municipal decision-making regarding urban development. Okay, next one, legal permissibility. Those issues that can lead to a legal repeal of the plan are unsurprisingly given a large amount of attention. Key actors whose opinions are kept in sharp focus here are those of the county administrative boards and the courts. The Swedish planning and building law and the environmental code state what issues must be attended to for the plan to be legally permissible. However, these requirements are very broad in the formulation of the legal text, and the interpretation of these regulations is constantly evolving and also contains identified inconsistencies and even idiosyncrasies down to the level of the individual handling case officer. The county administrative board can at different times during the planning process make demands towards the municipality to prove that critical aspects of the planning site and proposed construction have been properly investigated and addressed. It's not strictly legally codified exactly what these investigations should entail, which these issues are. Rather, the required scope and content of such investigations are established on a per-case basis, based on established practice, recent focusing events, and the material circumstances of the proposed site. In a recent survey of 214 detailed development plan processes performed by the Association of Swedish Local Authorities and Regions, found no less than 180 different types of expert investigations that were performed as part of these processes, including, for instance, horse allergen investigations, route pattern investigations, reindeer husbandry analysis, odor analysis, and avenue tree analysis. The most commonly recurrent types of investigations were geotechnics, traffic, natural value inventories, surface runoff, risk analysis, noise pollution, cultural heritage, and archaeology. And this is very much in line with also what we were told in the workshops. All of these were kind of mentioned by them. In recent years, there have been waves of focus on different types of endangered species that have required specific investigations, such as bats, certain species of bugs, frogs, and now also birds in general, following a recent court ruling. Issues that have come to the forefront and is now generally included in the bundle of standard investigations, to some extent due to focusing events, are flood risk analysis, which have partially been called upon due to recent cases of severe floods in Swedish towns and cities. Even if county administrative boards attempt to be helpful in conveying what they see as potential key issues as early as possible in the planning process, this is always on a basis of the best of their knowledge at the time, and new circumstances can always be revealed at later stages in the process, which may generate new requirements for investigations to be added. Since this will risk slowing down the process considerably, there is a motivation for practitioners to attempt to second guess already early on some of the key issues that may emerge, so these can be preemptively investigated and potentially handled already at the early stage of the process. And the desire to avoid costly backtracking therefore often motivates a speculative investment in numerous investigations already at very early stages of the process to avoid possible costly delays later. So moving on now to the last category of issues that get attention, those that concern political desirability. This is perhaps the vaguest, but nonetheless a crucial grouping of issues. The reason for this is the so-called, already mentioned, municipal planning monopoly in Swedish planning law, which means that the local political leadership always has the last say on planning decisions, and that their hand can only under very exceptional circumstances be forced to approve a plan, which virtually never happens, that the actually central government forces a plan onto a municipality. In the category of political desirability, we therefore find issues that relate on the one hand to local political goals, as well as those that relate to local political opinions. Those types of issues that are generally only attended to when there is a local political will to do so include investigations into personal safety and security, child impact assessments, green area factor analysis, social impact analysis, or upcycling analysis. These are some examples of those that are not demanded legally, but may be demanded because the local politicians ask for them to be done. None of these are required by law or established practice, but rather completely dependent on the expression of local political will and demand. However, it's also important to point out that due to the challenging overarching financial situation in most Swedish municipalities, a common an overriding often focus of the municipal organization is to generate income from land development processes, or at least to ensure that expenditures are kept at a minimum. And beginning to round off, I got a note from the computer saying it's time now. I now want to address a question that almost asks itself following the focus of what I previously said. If all of the above are those issues that tend to get attention in the process, which are those that don't? Which are those issues that are not generally considered crucial enough to become objects of robust attention allocation in the process? In this category, we first find some technical issues that have in previous times been subject of serious attention, but which through technical developments have become more of tick box exercises. You have to do them, but they are seldom very demanding. This includes the handling of health risks concerning radon contamination and sulfide minerals. Regarding other issues, however, there is a sense among many practitioners that they simply get less attention and carry less weight in the process than they deserve. Those issues that come up most recurrently as such issues were those that related to climate impacts and issues that many practitioners grouped under the label of social sustainability, including issues related to, for instance, qualitative public spaces and the development of good housing for all groups in society. Focusing on this last question, many respondents convey a frustration that social issues such as qualitative public environment and social equity issues such as mixed and affordable housing for all social groups do not get proper attention in the Swedish urban development process. Connecting back to the previous discussion, a reason for this is that these are to a large extent not tightly legally regulated issues. They're only brought into focus in the process to the extent that there is a concrete local political demand to do so. Further, it's important to realize that due to the institutional framework of these processes, all decisions in favor of such developments, of adding more public space, for instance, or making affordable housing, are extremely costly for both private developers and public authorities, since there is constantly an economic trade-off between public and commodified space, as well as between, for instance, rental apartment with lower direct financial yields and the selling off of less affordable owner-occupied apartments that generally produce a higher net present worth for the developer and landowner, and the landowner is sometimes also the municipality in this case. Some of our workshop participants also express a frustration that key social equity issues that could really make a difference cannot really be addressed within the context of the detailed development plan process. For instance, the mixing of tenancy forms that would contribute to social mixing, or even a local adequate supply of housing at all, are not, for instance, designated national interests. This means that they are issues that are easily passed by in the process, considering that the county administrative board never will address them in their reviews. Attention to these issues is therefore completely dependent on local political will if they are to play any role in the process. Adding together all the above, it becomes clear that the question of the political economy of attention in the Swedish urban development process, that is, the multidimensional costs associated with investing attention in different aspects of the process, is also deeply entwined with the practical geography of attention allocation. That is, what issues get attention at all. They are two sides to the same coin. Very briefly put, one could say that the issues that are given the most attention are those that risk to obstruct or derail the project. That is, issues that risk to jeopardize all those investments of time, money, and prestige that go into even the early stages of the project, and which constitute sunk costs that both investors, developers, planners, and politicians look to recuperate in the project. Further, with regards to the Swedish urban development process in relation to the garbage can theory of decision-making that I presented early on, it's actually somewhat questionable whether these planning processes are best described as organized anarchies. There are actually some quite clear institutional and legal frameworks for the processes, which to a large extent condition how these processes unfold, generating some degree of predictability. However, it's important to stress that this is only a degree of predictability, not in any way absolute certainty. Some of the reasons for this is the impact of local variations and even personal idiosyncrasies in how laws and regulations are interpreted and applied in the process. For instance, when it comes to the powerful county administrative board's interpretation of their mandate and obligations in the process. There's also a clearly negative discount rate on invested attention, where demands to invest attention later on in the process are much more costly than in the early stages. If an issue risks becoming a problem, municipalities and developers therefore want to deal with this as early on as possible in the development process. However, attention is a scarce and costly resource, particularly if it entails specialized knowledge that must be externally procured, which generates a disincentive to spend attention on issues that will not have an impact on the process. So here again, we see a direct link between the political economy and the practical geography of attention in the process, which to some extent is mediated through the pricing of time and money. Time is money and attention is a costly resource. Responsible urban practitioners therefore do not want to waste too much attention on issues that are not crucial for the success of the plan. And I say responsible not in the sense that they are, but who are responsible for carrying the process forward formally. At the same time, they cannot risk investing too little attention at the optimal moment, because if they fail to do this properly, the cost for this risk to become very steep later on in the process in the form of long delays or even project failure. Finally, I'll round off by returning to the issue that I know is of special interest to many of you here today, I think, regarding high-quality urban environments and housing for all. As I've already recounted, these are issues that many of the workshop participants feel were not receiving the attention that they deserve in the process. Some workshop participants argued that there is a potential legal basis to include demands for attention to these issues in the process, but it's not included in the currently established praxis, and it risks generating clear losses on the economic side for both developers and the municipality. So this implies that under current institutional conditions, the only way to ensure that these issues receive attention is placed squarely in the category of the politically desirable. Therefore, the onus of responsibility for making it possible to bring robust attention to these issues falls heavily on the shoulders of local politicians and local public opinions. Here, however, I want to round off on a slightly positive note in relation to John Forrester's strong emphasis on accounting for the potential agency of the individual planner in articulating social justice issues in the planning process. At numerous times in our workshops, participants highlighted that individual idiosyncrasies related to responsible case officers in municipal organizations or at the county administrative board, or even process consultants, can make a noticeable difference in what issues are given attention in the process. So there seems to be at least some room for activist planning in these processes, even if the final impact of these initiatives, of course, cannot be assured. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I would like to invite our discussant for today, Jochen de Vries, and I'll just stand here.
Yes, she has 3 hands, and that's when you understand. If you paid attention, you'll see it.
Jochen, shall I stay here and you stay here?
Okay, or yeah, sure.
Maybe some of you know the redevelopment of the Java Island here in Amsterdam, where Sjoerd Soeters created new small canals so it's the former harbor area, and in historicistic way of designing it, he created small canals with canal houses. They were narrow, and yes, when the plan was realized, the garbage trucks appeared not to be able to take the corners. So the municipality of Amsterdam had to buy new trucks. It can also be the other way around. It's a very inspiring lecture for me, and I think for all of us here, because for me this is classical planning studies. I would place this type of study in the tradition of what Andreas Faludi did in the 1970s, comparing day-to-day planning practices between the UK and the Netherlands. I think a lot of the work of Patsy Healy in the 1980s on the development process, and for example, the role of the planner, the day-to-day activities of the role of the planner in those processes. And I honestly, I think we've lost that type of research a little bit. So I'm extremely happy that you put it on the agenda. Again, it's also very, very rich immediately if you start talking to people like you did in planning practice and the diverse roles and stakes that they have to have in this process. So I have some very incoherent remarks, questions, suggestions. Well, we'll see. It is a human activity. That's what was my first impression. Okay, your focus on attention deficit, which is originally a psychological concept. You also refer to Herb Simon, of course, who also adapted the idea of limitations of the human brain to the impossibilities of rational planning. So I thought, oh, now we're going on the track of the psychology of participants in the planning process. But then you broaden it. You take a more, I would say, institutional perspective by referring to the garbage model, and you didn't mention it, but related to the stream model by Kingdom.
Yep, I took that out.
Yeah,
it's too long.
I should want to show that.
It was too long.
I know my classics as well. And communication, the receiver of info. That I think that is such an underestimated aspect of planning. That planning is influencing, and planning means that you want to bring across something to a recipient that you want to make the recipient do something. But it's seldomly thought in terms of what will make that recipient move. And I think your attention is also, I would interpret it as a plea of thinking in terms of the attention that the receivers want to give, and that you have to hook in to that kind of attention that possibly exists. A problem I have at the university as an administrator also a lot, like that we have a lot of senders of information and only a fragment is reaching its target. The planning process, I think we already discussed it yesterday. I think there are striking similarities between Sweden and the Netherlands. I think there are cases as when it comes to similarities that they're a very good comparison, very recognizable. And then you started with two observations that I think you introduced as reasons why attention as a scarce resource has become so much more important. That is, on the one hand, expert investigations and drowning in information. I think that these stand possibly for two important social developments. The expert investigations, of course, are legalized demands from society, and a more pluriform, multiform society creates these demands to planning processes. That is one. So in my view, that is a reflection of multiformity, pluriformity. Drowning in information is, of course, and probably also drowning in information that is on the one hand reliable, on the other hand unreliable, is also a typical phenomenon of our current situation. Then, having said that all, going to the end of your presentation, I still, at first I thought you are focusing on the psychological explanations, but then I think you come up with two lists. This gets attention and the others not. You probably didn't have the time, but then you get curious about the reasons why, the explanations. And I think there is, they're more conscious thinking about the type of explanations. Are these economic? It seemed to be that economic reasoning, because of the important role of developers, is a strong explanation of why things get attention or not. But it's also institutional, clearly, about the way the process is structured. It might still also be psychological. Some issues are more appealing to politicians, for example, or to the lay public. Or is it politics, just a power play that is going on? I would be very interested in that. That would be my next questions. Okay, I don't know whether this is of any help or confusing.
No, great.
I'll leave it with that.
Great, thank you. Should I respond?
Yeah, please do, because afterwards I will take some
No,
questions from the public.
I'm very honored that you put me in the group with those scholars that have been really inspiring to read, and I was very I came to, very sorry that Patsy Healy passed away recently, and I was so fascinated when I discovered her earlier work, having come to her work through communicative planning, or what do you call it, the book. Now it beats my mind. The collaborative planning, the collaborative planning book. But then discovering her earlier kind of more sociological work also of the planning process and so on. So I think maybe to say something first about the overall the inspirations and so on. We talked about now Herb Simon and so on, and organization theory. I think I started out in philosophy. There are these philosophers today of attention, like Bernard Stiegler, who's also passed away too early, and Tiziana Terranova. And then I think when I started rereading organization theory, I was seeing it with these different eyes of how central attention actually was to this. And it was nice to see. I was, suddenly it's doing this with the lens of attention somehow. And also reading Patsy's last piece, which has came out in planning theory, how she connects care. And I saw she wrote about attention a number of times, connecting questions of care and attention, which was, I had no idea she would be doing that in her last piece. So that's, it feels good somehow. But something else which you said about this stream of information and how to, something that I didn't bring into the talk or the paper, but there's really interesting sociological work on ignorance studies. Strategic ignorance there's a Lindsay McGooey, which I found mind-blowing and fascinating, because coming to this, I came into planning theory at a stage with a lot of fascination about complexity and about appreciating complexity and recognizing. And then comes this totally different angle saying, the world is inherently so complex, so we constantly have to perform, make ourselves ignorant. And strategically, there is a blocking out of information. And the crucial question then is, of course, what does that filter look like? What is filtered out and why? And that's something that's also been kind of coming into this. When I think can be, and something I didn't bring up, we had Mike Racco with us this morning in a brainstorming, and he talked about how AI is already changing the property industry. And I think that is something, because what you said about the psychological, I try to take a more sociological, I think, approach to it. And if you take a sociological approach, you cannot make assumptions about where the attention is going to come from. And you can start talking about different kinds of attention and different methods of attending to. And I think AI is is, of course, and it was actually discussed already by Herb Simon in 1972 about information management systems. He was very skeptical. And computers, will computers? No, they won't help. They will just generate more information, which some human in the end will have to sit and try to figure out.
Right.
But I think with the current revolution in AI, it will be able to do some of the attention work that only humans can do at present. Is that good or bad? I'm not proselytizing here. I'm just saying that I think we're going to see that happening in planning, the outsourcing of attention to technology, to algorithms. Yeah.
Okay, great. Maybe we have some burning questions from the public, Federico, and then Joseph.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. So I have an invitation to reflect further on the empirical work. I like very much the idea to map the geography of attention in this everyday practice of urban development. So to me, it looks like the first phase is crucial, and then there is some sort of path dependency of the attention geography. So I was wondering whether you looked into this, whether you see that some choices in terms of attention organization in the beginning, then drag along the process, influence eventually the next steps. So basically, can we modify the first phases in a way that, for example, the economic justification, the legal justification become less relevant than the political one? That's my first question. The other is that, this study was done on an urban development scale, and there the implementation imperative is very strong. So these people are there because they think we need to get something done. Would it be, what would be the geography of attention in a process that is not implementation oriented, where, for example, there is a strategic plan to be done, or there are some agenda points to be set? There could be a very different format. So I wonder how. I'm not surprised, let's put it this way, that the legal and the economic are very prominent here. That was my. But in the last, related to it, and then I'll shut up. Help me.
No.
It was nice, the conclusion where you show that the political justification or the political dimension gets a variable attention. So maybe you can develop that. What does it mean, variable? In what conditions became a crucial issue in your workshop? And in what conditions not?
Great. Very good reflections, and I'm taking notes here, like stuff I have to attend to, because also about the comprehensive scale or the regional scale also, came up in our discussions earlier yesterday. And Tuna, you raised it a number of times that this is what is needed now, sorely. The interesting thing is all Swedish municipalities have to have a comprehensive plan, which is actually a strategic plan. It's both a kind of very rough land use plan, but it's also, but it's only consultative. You can initiate detailed development plans that are also completely in opposition to what's said in the comprehensive plan. But they are often used, and you would see that the strategic planners are often very much carriers of the planning ethos and seeing themselves as that in municipalities. Like, we need to get all these important issues. We need to have a section on public health, kind of geography and planning, and we need to have the section in the comprehensive plan. But then there's constantly the frustration that when the money comes in, the game changes, and then it's much more crass. Like what's nice to do and what's need to do somehow, and nice to do goes out. What I found interesting about also these, what you said about early on in the process and how that can be, I think, and this will sound very trite, but I really think the introduction of property capital has perverted the Swedish planning process. And I'm not saying that as a value judgment, I'm saying that as a analysis of how the Swedish planning law was constructed when it was first introduced in 1987, the planning law that has since been amended and so, but it's foundationally the same law from 1987. It was a law that was designed for a society in which private capital is not an influential player in urban development at all. And the whole idea of the law is that the planning process is that basically it's the public authorities that directly or indirectly fund all urban development. So the important thing is to have this open and transparent process where the public can participate and there's this back and forth between the experts and what's really in together. You figure out along the way through the consultation what is the optimal use. And of course, this with the capital investments that now happen so early on, and the commitments, there's not anyone working in the industry who would imagine a process to be able to work like this, a planning process, unfortunately. So what I'm getting to is, I was always wondering, before I started getting into these specificities of how these processes work, why were planners, I think that it was called, used to be called DAD. Why were planners DAD? Why were they acting as DAD, which meant decide, announce, defend. That's how planners act. They're not open to discussion. They just decide something for themselves and then they announce it and then they just defend it. And I think this to me gives a very reasonable explanation to why planners would behave that way. Because you need to get all this stuff sorted early on. And it has to do with professional prestige, it has to do with money, responsibility. And then by the time you're actually presenting something, there's so much invested in it that you have to defend it. Because, I think I'm blabbing now, but I think you see my point. What I think is an important other point connected to this, and which I realized last night, I left something out, which is important. And that's when it comes to high qualitative public space, our respondents often said that falls on our responsibility to try to be the champions of that, the planners themselves in the process. And that's then another adding to political desirability, it's professional norms. They said it's difficult, but we're the ones trying to stand up for that all the time and just on the margin trying to add a little more green space, add a little more quality and investment in public space and so on. So I think that was present. And actually, funnily enough, those that were most kind of affirmative about that were not the municipal planners, but the planning consultants saying, we're the ones who really have to fight against, on the one hand, the developer, the other hand, the municipality to add more public space. Because that's not the way I imagine the consultant, it's the other way around, as a handmaiden. Oh. One more thing. The problem, I think, with this process is also, and how it works out, is that the only way for the public to participate is by being reactive and trying to obstruct. It's basically generating and acting roles of the NIMBY. That's the only way you can become, have a say in the process, is by obstructing. So and everyone knows that now in Sweden, that if you want to stop an urban development or have an influence, the only thing you can do is go out and look out for a bat. Yeah. A bat or a salamander. Then you'll have a kind of impact. If you try to talk about, let's develop ideas together, no one's going to listen. But if you find a bat,
Yeah. Great, thank you. I propose that we have Joseph there, and then I have a question from you and Willem. But please, if you haven't met before, Willem, obviously you did. Please introduce yourself so that Jonathan knows who you are. All right?
I'm Willem Selet, an eminent professor of this institute. Thanks, Jonathan, for your great talk.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. First of all, your fabulous illustrations. I wondered who is this painter from. I'm really interested in that. But of course, your talk, you started your reasoning with the problem of the amount of knowledge, the amount of agents, subjects involved. And obviously, this is not the real problem. The problem is not the amount of information, but how the selections are made. That's the real challenge for planning. And at the end, you come to 4 categories. I think they're very relevant. The technical possibilities, the economic affordability, legal permissiveness. This is all a matter of conflict. What usually happens is that planners say, okay, we have technical problems, let's call in the technical experts. That's where the expert meetings are going. And what are the economic problems? Let the economists come. And the legal problems, let's bring in the legal experts. But the problem is that all these questions, the 4 questions, are highly conflicted and they're very fluid. They are interpretable in very different ways. And that's a challenge for the organization, for the selective organization of the process. So I think the legal permissibility is not an issue for the legal experts, it's an issue for us, for all people, and in particular for the planners who organize these processes in between all these agencies. And I was interested that you raised this correlation between planning and law, not in the instrumental sense, but more I think the basic question is how can the process of search be organized to define the meaning of legal conditions
Yeah.
on all these agents that are active in the planning process. And that's a process of searching. It's not just asking the legal experts whether it's allowed or not. No, the different interpretation of different actors matters a lot. And maybe we need new legal conditions in new situations.
Yeah.
Planning problems in new planning situations. And after 100 years of planning practice, I'm afraid we are still in the beginning of organizing this basic process.
No, I agree, and what it really it's fascinating because the way an amateur such as I look at the law, I imagine it as black and white, but it's all gray zones. Especially, I mean, it's different for different legal systems, etc. But the Swedish one is really enormous gray zones, even down to the level, as I said, of individual handling case officers as a county administrative boards who can have completely different, not completely, but very variable definitions of what it entails to safeguard erosion and flooding and that kind of, what does that mean? So there were even discussions among our, they would name individual handling case officers when we talk to the municipal planners and the consultants that this one does it this way, that one does it that way. In that part of the country, they do it that way. And this is an ongoing concern. The county administrative boards themselves, they produce reports saying, comparing the praxis, and then it's the thing with the courts, they're really setting precedents. And that's something they say also. Every new court case on planning law and development law that comes from the upper courts, it sends a shockwave often through the planning community because, suddenly now this court case says that we can never negatively impact any bird habitats, period, is a new one. That, if birds, and that could be any birds, magpies, city doves, can be proven to be impacted negatively, it's not permissible. And of course that's going to change probably, but at current that is the court's precedence in interpreting the law, which is interesting. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I think that's I will be very interested to see what's going to happen with that. Yeah.
May I respond very
Of course
shortly
you
on
may.
the last thing? That's the point. In the common law, in the system of common law, I think the making of new legal norms is socialized.
Yeah.
In the sense that people are allowed to suggest a new interpretation, a new legal interpretation, a new legal condition. And then the court evaluates this and says, okay,
Yeah.
it's a good law. Oh, no, we should adapt it again. So the court may make new laws. This is in the sense of explaining what is written in law, but how are we making you law in the process of action?
Yeah.
Thank you, Willem.
Good.
Joseph.
Hi, Jonathan. I'm Joseph Lamkin, a research master's student of urban studies. I wanted to ask a little bit, I really appreciated your diagnosis of this attention deficit order of planning, consisting of these 4 dimensions of political, ecological barriers, or not quite barriers, but like factors in the process. And when you touched upon the social accountability, I wondered how that could be a potential 5th dimension, or how would you, or maybe my question is more towards, how would you conceive of, in terms of political imaginaries of the future, of this 5th dimension to be either integrated into the previous 4, or added as a dimension on its own, or perhaps be the foundation for the new role of the planners? I understand this is a very abstract and wide question, but
no, I think because I think that's very relevant, and I think I have to figure out this because I realize I cannot obfuscate the empirical results about professional norms, because that actually was something that was repeatedly stressed, them saying that this is what we try to do, this is our responsibility, it's not easy and we fail, but we try to do this. I think the dimension, and I think to try to think about it economically in a wide sense, I mean kind of Bourdieu, different kinds of capital, symbolic, cultural, for instance, planners or various types of urban engineers, of course there's an economy of prestige in their fields, and there are, they don't want to be embarrassed, because that's also sort of loss of symbolic capital, and having a plan fail, that's game over, that's mega embarrassing, and then maybe it's not embarrassing, it's a little bit unfortunate. You can sit and have a beer and say, yeah, we did all this, and there was an okay park, but there are no cheap apartments, and you'll be like, yeah, that's not as embarrassing, because everyone in the professional community knows how difficult it is. But this is something, I guess, I'm not sure I have enough in this material to delve really deeply into that, but that would be something interesting to look at, the kind of economy of professional prestige and how that plays in here.
Thank you very much. My name is Julie, and I come from Oslo. I'm doing a PhD in urban mobility, but I think this question I have is as a practitioner, because I'm working in Oslo municipality and I'm working a lot with climate in planning. So my question comes from there. And I think this kind of how you're talking about attention and how you what are these decisions based on with this framework is very interesting. And what my question I think is related to yours, kind of on the legal framework, because we have a struggle I'm trying to use this and these gray zones that you're talking within the legal framework with kind of raising climate on the agenda within the legal framework and within the municipal planning agenda. This is also, since we are working in Oslo, we will work also with national government to kind of raise, I'm trying to get it also on legally on the national agenda. So I think this is because you have all this interest of things that getting to attention and getting it like when you're saying this is when your planning law comes from, that was what was important then. So getting it legally binding I think with that kind of giving the possibility to kind of move it from one of 1,000 different important political considerations or this economic priorities in the municipality where you have all these important things that you want to consider, to kind of try to get it as, I think our kind of ultimate goal would be to have it as a lineal economies is like if you actually had a carbon budget that you can go over. So like having like confounding or deciding for how you're actually doing these processes. Well, how would you think of that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because this is where it also becomes so nationally specific, depending on how the legal system is constructed and the legal culture even. And I mean, the Swedish laws are often very generally written. They're written not to have to be changed very much. So that means that actually governments can quite easily, it's funny because how we imagine systems are not, like you would imagine the Swedish system being very far away from the British, where everything can be changed overnight. You can open departments or government and close them, whereas the Swedish is slow moving. But actually, because of how laws are written in Sweden, it's the interpretation of the law that's really important. And there are parts of the law, for instance, the Building and Planning Act, that could be extremely progressive if interpreted that way by the courts or by the government, because the government can also say, building on this law, we're now going to interpret the Swedish planning and building law says, for instance, that it's the responsibility of every municipality to assure good quality housing for all groups of society and to ensure, the environmental values of the future. And it's in the first sentences of the law, and there have been legal challenges, but the courts say, well, actually, it's not being practiced this way. It's not being applicable for a legal challenge. But if the government would say, now we're going to start actually practice this part of the law, they could. So I think it's these questions of, which Willem we're also onto, like the law is such, when you start getting into it, it's such a much more malleable thing than we often imagine. Not just that you have to legislate anew, but how it's just used. Yeah.
I think Andre, the question.
Yeah. So maybe going back to Kevin's original sort of point, attention. Like when you just read the poster, the presentation, you think about the human element of attention, and the way that you present the dilemmas at the end as political, economic. It almost removes sometimes that human element of attention, or the different actors that give attention to different issues. Say, an investor is giving attention to a lot of different things. Say, even an urban planner. Even if we look at the whole entire project as a whole, or the feasibility of the project. Say, I know like investors and developers are especially interested at the very preliminary stage, doing like on the napkin type of calculation that determines the feasibility or interest at a very high level before they even demand more attention towards the project. Right? So attention is also sort of a tool to even gain the next stage, even before we get to the actual planning process or anything even presented. So with that, maybe a more general question around, have you thought of attention in relation to like different actor typologies within the development process, and tying different forms of attention rather than the categorization you developed in today's presentation?
Yeah.
Have you thought of other ways to present?
Yes, so to say something, coming back to the research we actually did, the focus of the research project was not attention in itself. This is a lens I've added to the material afterwards to some extent. What we were interested in is which are the sort of different competences and types of expertise involved in this process, in the whole urban development process, and at what stage and in what relation to each other, relations of conflict or collaboration, or so that was at the heart of what we were exploring, making these relational maps of the process. But of course, the interesting thing is that came, but we also theorized that it would be entwined with questions of what issues get attention, because different actors will carry different foci of attention and champion them, or see themselves as responsible for them, or be delegated. So I think that's a really crucial, and I think just that question also, and it ties back to some of the other questions, is so who's involved and what do they see as their job or role or kind of professional responsibility or legal responsibility. And something that I took out because it was too long, it was very long, were these also reflections, which I think is interesting. For instance, the municipal planners would say there's not enough attention paid to climate, whereas the property developers said, okay, So climate, we have to ensure that the emissions of this project will be much lower than current demands, because we have to make headroom for the future climate directive and how that's developing in the EU and the new carbon trading system, which means that considering the time it takes for these plans to be completed, by the time we're going to build this, there's going to be much higher demand. So they said that's top of our agenda, whereas the municipal planners said we're not looking at this at all, and that's a shame, which I found really, really interesting. Whereas, I mean, of course, it's just they're just looking at it at the kind of building level or site level. But and another thing about this directing attention is that many of the consultancies who have, so you understand, a big role in the Swedish process, they say that they dearly, if they want to try, they're always accused of overselling. You need this and that and that and that and that investigation, because they make money from selling all these investigations. But they said, we know we're accused of this, and this, it's true, that's what we make money from. But we always try to push for these social impact analysis, and that's not just because to sell another investigation, it's because it actually brings attention. It demands that attention is, to some degree at least, paid to these questions. Then you can ask yourself, of course, you can take that report and just put it in the bookshelf or the, but they argue that that gives them an opportunity to say, hey, listen, now we made this report and it says, well, this development isn't going to give housing for all, it's not going to do this, what are you going to do about it? I don't know. But just reporting some recurrent things that came up.
Do they have certain responsibility, or they tend to victimize themselves in this technocratic system? This is also a job. I'm doing my best. I'm like a call center already. Contact this and that. That's very common also. And second, so how do you see this? And then second is, so at the same time, in the Netherlands, but also I believe in Sweden, government also make different types of strategies and visions in public space, in street market, in climate, so how does these strategies and visions, policies actually come across in the planning process? Are they obligatory to review them in response, or just a parallel universe?
Okay.
So how does this come together in terms of public environment? Who is paying back? Who takes the quality control, and what is the guide of these kind of things?
Oh, very good. Yes, so I think what was interesting, I remember being very inspired by Jean Hillier's. She did a paper a long time ago categorizing planners she interviewed as either kind of chameleons who would just kind of go with the flow and be cynical, or kind of these passionate champions. And the interesting thing here is I think that the planners we talked to, they within the scope of minutes, they would flip between being very cynical and kind of crass, and being very passionate. So it wasn't one or the other, the question of being a call center. So and I think they all displayed both passion and frustration. And the interesting thing, I think also, I mean, maybe it's expectable to some extent that planners will say that not enough attention is paid to high quality urban environment and not enough to social justice, because that's what we learn in our educations are important, and then in your daily practice that's what the frustration, because those things could always be better, I guess. But I did find, but an important point you raised, I think, is about the consultants, because we're going to actually write a separate paper on the process consultants, because actually they many times argued, the way we normally imagine them, they're hired guns, they're just handmaidens of capital, really. They're really just low prestige in that regard. They were the ones who were arguing that they were the ones who had to champion questions of social equity and championed questions of high quality public space. They were the ones who safeguarded those things, because both the municipal planners and the developers, they were in cahoots together to just try to maximize income for each of them, whereas the consultants were the ones who had to push for these things, but then of course doing it very delicately, because they at the same time have the role to serve. And there was something about personal agency. Yes, no individual agency. Yeah, the individual agency. Yeah, but that came through a lot, and that was interesting. That actually, for instance, the idiosyncrasies of the handling case officer, the planner, responsible planner at the municipality, could make a big difference. Like an individual handling case officer could suddenly say that, okay, there's nothing in the legal praxis about attending to urban heat island effects, but there could be this case officer who's read something about them and said, haha, we're not going to let this plan through until you prove that you are not increasing urban heat island effects. And, you know, the developer might become super frustrated, and then the consultant has to step in and try to, but that will, because the handling case officer, okay, the politicians sometimes they can go around and go directly to the politicians, the developer, depending on the contacts, but that's a power to actually bring attention to issues.
Other questions? I have a question myself. You made me think, did you see a positive correlation between the attention during the planning process and the product? If something was there and really good attention was put in there, how is the correlation to the product itself?
We didn't ask about it, we didn't look at it. But there were some statements about this, of course, and there were a lot of reflections from more experienced planners and planning consultants forcibly arguing, and also developers more expectedly, forcibly arguing that the amount of expert investigations into specific issues that need to be done today is not increasing the quality of the planned environment, which surprised me, because spontaneously I still think somehow that, of course, if we look at all these important issues, that must mean that the plans become better than if we wouldn't. But they claim not, and that would be interesting to dig deeper into.
I definitely think so, because when I think of the Dutch context, if you open the newspapers nowadays, it's all about affordable, accessible housing. All the regulations, all the attention we put is on that. Do we get something out of this attention? I'm not very sure whether the correlation is going. I mean, there is definitely political interest, but that interest translates into numbers, as we discussed today. Let's create more housing in Amsterdam and all our problems are solved. Let's increase the densities and all our problems are solved. Without going to the depths of, well, who is going to have access to this new housing, what kind of housing, and actually are we able to keep it in the affordable stock? These important questions don't get the attention. Now the attention is on, do they really create that number of housing? Are they able to deliver the target they put, very technocratic targets, of course. So attention is, in a way, is kind of diverted towards targets which are not the real targets.
So now you can get me started, and I can talk for a long time about the municipality that I know best, which is the city of Stockholm, which is the biggest also in Sweden. And exactly that thing happened for about, we had this big housing push, since we have an ongoing housing crisis, which is not, many argue it's not a housing shortage actually, but it's a housing crisis which is attempted to be solved by increasing the overall supply. But the way this strong political push was formulated was, one, X number of housing units, and two, it shouldn't cost. You know, it needs to balance the books, so you need to sell off land in each project to balance the books in each project. We can talk a lot about the perverse effects of that, but the overall perverse effects is that suddenly we started getting a flurry of an enormous amount of one-bedroom apartments, being produced, which was not at all to mostly what was needed if you looked at the demographics of those that were, you know, in precarious housing situation. These were big families often, but we were getting one-room apartments. Why? Because when the logics of the construction economy is you'll get the most number, you'll check off the most number of produced units by one bedroom apartment. You'll get the most income per square meter for one bedroom apartment, and you'll get because of that the most land value from one bedroom apartment. So yeah, it's then that attention is singularly focused to those metrics, which yeah.
Like Willem said, I think we need to also, we discussed this morning, we need to go back to the basics of planning a little bit.
Yeah.
To set the norms, I mean, to set the principles. And yeah, instead of just putting quick targets, which will take all the policy attention, but yeah, the product is questionable, of course. All right, I think we are getting tired. We should finish. I see the eyes looking at the drinks. Before we finish, I would like to thank you for coming all the way here, Jonathan.
Thank you. It's been great.
Present for you on behalf of our department. Not
Thank
to
you.
forget Amsterdam.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I would also like to thank to the apprentices who are busy right now. Elisha and Emma, can you come up over here? Because they have been busy for the last few months organizing this entire event. They helped me to organize the excursion. Yesterday they presented the excursion, wonderful, very professional. They organized the entire day, so I would like to give a big applause to you. Something to read though. Okay, guys. Thank you. Okay.
All right.
Now the drinks and little finger food is waiting for us, so please, we can continue our conversations over there.
Wonderful.
Thank you. This was wonderful.